Hello everybody, welcome back to the WWE 2K25 University Universe Mode series. I'm getting all my words mixed up because I'm that excited. Welcome to episode 16. Welcome to the goddamn show. Today we're talking all about factions, what makes them tick, and how you can create your own groups within WWE 2K25 Universe Mode. So initially I was going to make Universe Mode University a thing that only lasted a set amount of time, but now I feel like with so many of your comments and so many questions, I feel like we can extend it out just indefinitely until we achieve everything and then try and answer everybody's questions. So let's talk about factions today. That's been a question and a common one. How do you make your factions? Let's have a look at some of WWE and professional wrestling's factions. Let's have a look at why they work. So we're going to start with the golden era of factions. So let's have a look at the NWO. So if you're unaware of the NWO, you're a little bit younger and you're, well, not old like me. You might have seen clips of the NWO, but the NWO is probably the best example of a faction that I could give you in terms of creativity. So let's have a look at why it worked. So they had a clear purpose, and the purpose of the faction was to take over WCW. They brought in Kevin Nash and Scott Hall as the outsiders. And it wasn't, back then there was no kind of like social media to understand why they went there. And the group, when selecting the stars, had major players like Hulk Hogan, who at the time was so over in the 90s, late 90s, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. The chemistry and the star power made them unforgettable. And they obviously had a clear purpose. Next up, DX, a faction all about rebellion and breaking the rules. WWE was kind of edgy when DX was formed and going towards the Attitude Era. And members like Shawn Michaels and Triple H brought new energy to WWE. The key to the success of D-Generation X was the charisma of the members. But it's important to note that not all factions succeed. For example, take the Nexus. They started really strong with a powerful debut, but internal conflicts and lack of direction led to their downfall. And let's not forget the subsidiary of the Nexus, which was the Core, which had potential because there were stars like Wade Barrett and Ezekiel Jackson, which you guys might not have even heard of, but at the time they had like quite a lot of popularity. But they struggled to find a clear identity. They didn't really have a purpose, and they ultimately faded away. So what can us as content creators, universe mode bookers do, and what can we learn from these examples? Successful factions need to have a clear purpose, strong chemistry among members, and a connection with the audience. That is basically it. That is it in a nutshell. So we're going to talk about different elements of creating a faction and some advice that I would give you guys in order to kind of get some inspiration to create your own factions. When is it a good idea to create a faction? Well, I would say a good time to introduce a faction is when you have multiple superstars with either a shared goal or a storyline, or similar superstars that are not really doing anything but could work quite well together to achieve like a certain goal. So an example of this would be creating a faction. If there's a group of wrestlers who have a common enemy or similar wrestling styles, then that's perfect. If they have I'm trying to think like the Core, they were like underutilized talent. If you have a group of underutilized talent, they can form together and rebel against the authority. And it's just kind of like getting into that mindset of setting them a clear goal. They need something. Are they going to take over a division? Are they going to go after champions? Are they going to try and make their careers better? Like, what is the goal of the faction? So when you're creating something, you should... When is it right to create a faction? When you have a purpose for the people that will be involved. How many factions is too many? Keep it balanced. Having a few factions adds depth without overwhelming the story. Usually what I would suggest is 3 to 5 factions across all your brands. I wouldn't try and have faction warfare everywhere because then it becomes confusing, like AEW, where they've got about 5 million factions and you don't know who's loyal to which faction, and it just all comes confusing. Try and keep like minimal. That way they have bigger impact as well. And what should you look for in a faction? A faction, of course, I keep saying it, clear purpose. It's the word of the day. Before you even create a faction and start picking members, think about what you want a faction to achieve in your universe mode. Like, is it something specific? Is there something random? Is there a specific person they're going to take out, a specific title they're going to take and hold hostage? You're always going to get a big blowout in a faction as well, and no faction ever lasts forever. If you can tell me a faction that lasts forever, maybe Bullet Club, but they changed the members, then there's also that element to consider. So identifying members. So I think members should always have clear roles. So when you're creating a faction, I think it's important to assign the leader role. Who's the main character? Who is the main guy within the faction that everything's going to blow up in his face or her face eventually? What is the benefit of them being the leader? Like, what are their goals? Are they going to go after a championship? Are they going to try take members of the roster out? Are they going to try undermine authority? Like, what is their goal? I think then you can have like an enforcer styled character. It doesn't necessarily have to be like the biggest person on the roster. It can just be somebody who's like quite emotionless. So like off the top of my head, people like Bron Breakker, Bronson Reed, Ilya Dragunov, Gunther, like these guys who don't really like their motto is like brutality. Rhea could be a good enforcer. And I think you need a technical expert, somebody who's a bit like a Randy Orton, a young Randy Orton who's maybe not as like big, but like has that sort of cocky, arrogant JD McDonagh-like vibe. I mean, you can obviously book certain superstars to have that kind of like feel. But if you look at the Judgment Day, it's nicely balanced. You've got let's look at it now. So the leader is obviously, I would say Finn Balor. Just like off looking, you've got like Dominic, who is like the technical guy. You've also got JD, who's like another cowardly guy. You had Damian Priest, that was an enforcer, and obviously the Judgment Day is past the point of forming, so there's like stages of it like falling apart now. So I think some additional tips that I give you to keep storylines fresh is having internal conflicts. I think when you're creating a faction, you've always got to think of the payoff. The leader's it's not going to stay together, so it has to make sense that when it implodes, that people are going to be interested in that story between the individual members in the faction. Because that is always the case of what happens within factions. Never stay together forever, and if you book factions to stay together forever, they become boring, no matter how over they are. You have to consider like whether it be somebody getting replaced, or somebody turning, or somebody deviating away from the goal, or getting an opportunity and falling out with fellow members of the faction. You've got to consider when you're creating a faction, what is the end goal? Who are the two people that are going to be left? What's going to happen? Like the Shield, for example, they all went their separate ways. Roman became the head of the table. Seth became Mr. WrestleMania, and John Moxley cuts himself every night. But it's like different types of like goals. So think about that, guys. Think about the payoff when you create a faction. It's always good when you have a faction, and the way I book my faction is I have a clear purpose. So the purpose is to take over XYZ. I have a middle ground where I know things are going to start to get like a little bit rocky, and things might not necessarily go according to the initial plan between the faction, and then I'm going to have a payoff where it's going to be like certain members of the roster and one individual, it pays off in a match and culminates, everything implodes, and we all after WrestleMania go in different directions, if that makes sense. So just think about that, guys. That is how my advice for create a faction. In the comments, obviously, let me know what is the greatest faction that you've ever created, and what was their purpose in your universe mode. Guys, thank you so much for the support. I love you all. Thank you for being here, and peace.